Hello and welcome to episode 257 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans' weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and we are going to have a podcast today to accompany an ongoing feature with an RPG fan. But before we go into details, let's introduce the rest of the panel, starting with John O. Logan.
Hey, hello everybody.
And Alana Hagues.
Hey everyone.
And Zach Wilkerson.
Hi everybody.
Now, Zach, excuse my use of multiple conjunctions there, but this ongoing feature, you were its architect. The feature is called the Best RPG of Each Year, or maybe we're going to title it something fancy for when it publishes. And at the time of posting this podcast, it will be in one or two parts, posting, over the first half of October. But let's talk about the feature a little bit and what it is, and then we can talk about how the podcast ties into it.
So basically the idea was, and it was pitched some time ago, and we kind of picked it up, the idea was to pick the best RPG of every year since the year that Dragon Quest was originally released. It's not the first RPG or even necessarily the first console RPG, but it's sort of the RPG that solidified what the genre became. And so we went through with a staff vote and some internal discussions to decide on the best RPG, and then also a runner-up for each year since 1987 on. We also pulled in readers as well, and it's I've looked back, and I think from a pure text perspective, in a single feature, it might be the largest feature we've ever run. So I'm excited for it.
Yeah, that's I guess 66 entries over 3 or 4 parts is how we're publishing the feature. So, I mean, that's 66 medium-length paragraphs. That's a lot of text. I wrote 4 small entries for that, and Jono and Alana, I think you also contributed parts to the piece. Is that correct?
Yeah, a couple of them.
Yeah, I did 8 of them.
Yeah, I think all of you wrote more than I did, actually, so, yeah.
Yeah, but you still have the harder job.
Yeah, so you figure 70 chunks or paragraphs written by at least 15 to 20 RPG fan staff people. It's a beast of a feature, and it deserves a podcast accompaniment. So we have this, when we were doing research for the feature and doing the staff vote for the feature, we compiled just lists and lists of the RPGs of each year, and that sort of got Zach and I thinking, maybe we could each pick a favorite year or even rank the best years of RPGs. And that's what this podcast is. We, the 4 of us, myself, Alana, Jono, Zach, made individual top 10 lists of our favorite years of RPGs, and then using a simplified scoring system, made a ranked list of 10, the 10 best years for RPGs, and we were going to go down the list and sort of discuss each year. But before we do that, there were no rules that we had, or no specific guidelines to, make sure to follow these criteria when you rank your years. Nothing like that. Just sort of a follow your heart, pick your favorite. But let's talk about our approaches a little bit. Alana, what thoughts were going through your head when you were sort of compiling your individual list?
A lot. I guess I just tried to whittle it down to stuff that I'd played a lot of games, years I'd played a lot of games from, and then I tried to weigh objectivity and subjectivity a little bit, because generally I don't really play many Western RPGs, I don't play tons of visual novels, so I had to kind of take everybody's considerations into account, but ultimately gave my overall bias more weight, because at the end of the day it's my personal top 10 list, and my opinion is right in my head, so that's what I want everybody else to see how I interpret this list. And yeah, I mean, the feature was a hell of a thing to vote on. I found it easy to vote on the feature more than I did to put this list together. This was so hard to put together for me. You could whittle it down to 10, or you could try and whittle it down to 10. That took ages. And then putting them into an order was even worse. It was just crazy. But yeah, it's a mix of my opinions and what I think everybody else thinks really good. But I'm most important.
I had the same approach as you, where I mostly just sort of went with, maybe I weighted a favorite game more than a game I just liked, but I also considered games I didn't play, I'm trying to just think of a quick example. I have never played a Dark Souls game, but for the years that had Dark Souls and Demon Souls, I'm that game is legendary and, started its own genre. I should at least give that year points in consideration, even though I'm not a Dark Souls guy. But ultimately, my list reflected my tastes and preferences. But I still considered games I hadn't played to a degree. Jono, what was your approach when you were compiling your own list?
Well, I looked at the list that we compiled, and then I literally just kind of went through it and crossed out anything I could dismiss out of hand just to try to get it down to a manageable number. But that left me with still most of the years left. And then I just went through and kind of painfully picked out years that, had some of my favorite games in it, but it might have been like one game in the year, and just kept hitting at it until I narrowed it down to the 10. Generally, I kind of looked at my own personal opinion, my connection to that year, critical favorites, so games that I have never played, but I recognize are considered some of the best games ever played. And I also added a little bit of historical significance to it, like years that changed the face of RPGs and changed the face of gaming, as very, very important years in RPGs. So I kind of tried to balance those three things.
Right on. And I don't mean to piggyback on you a little bit, but I also sort of made a first cut that ended up being, I think, 16 years. And then the second, and I did that pretty quickly, but then getting that 16 down to 10 was the real struggle, where I was similar to Alana. It was just, it was really harder to do that than it was to do the initial vote on the feature, especially because I'm basically considering 16 options that had 10 games each, say, rather than just picking one among 10 33 times in a row. There were two different exercises, doing the vote in September and then making this and then preparing for this podcast. Zach, I guess for both compiling the feature and preparing for this podcast, what thoughts and ideas struck you as you were making your own list?
So a couple things that I'm not sure I mentioned earlier. We're using Japanese release dates for this, which I think is important to note.
Yes.
Because some of them will seem strange.
We are using original release dates. Yeah. So when the game first released in any region, which means Japanese release dates for JRPGs and North American or European release dates for Western RPGs. But that throws everyone off a little bit. I had Dragon Quest XI got knocked back to 2017, which was a factor for me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we only used original releases in most cases. When we were originally compiling the list, there were one or two exceptions to that, but in general, there were not too many. So, for example, like Persona 4 could only appear in, I think it's 2008. Mm-hmm. Is that right? Yeah. And not 2012, which I believe was the year that Golden was released. And so that certainly had a factor. But I will admit that in some cases when I was voting, both on the original feature and then also on this one, if there was a remake that was significant and maybe definitive, that probably factored in my mind a little bit in terms of the quality of that. Maybe it shouldn't have, but it did. But the other thing that struck me as I was voting on this particular podcast list was that I really value quality over quantity. There were some years that just had maybe 10 RPGs that I thought were all really good, but ultimately the ones that I voted higher were the ones that had 2 or 3 or 4 that I thought were amazing. And as we go through and talk about it, you'll see that reflected in my votes.
Yeah, same thing for me. I think I mentioned before, I thought of games either that I liked versus I loved versus maybe I didn't play but seem really important. And those, I sort of tried to count those for every year. And sometimes I went with, I ranked higher a year that had just a zillion games I liked versus a year that had 1 or 2 I loved. Sometimes it was the opposite. It was really each of us went with our instinct and followed our heart. These are completely, I mean, Alana, you said you tried to balance the subjective and objective. These lists are subjective.
Yeah, of course. I just mean generally, I think Jono put it better in the historical significance to, mm-hmm, Dark Souls or, I don't know, off the top of my head, what's an influential RPG or something? Anything like that, like Chrono Trigger, something like that is immediately going to get 10 points compared to, I don't know, something else. Yeah.
Chrono Cross?
Well, Chrono Cross is more inventive, so, yeah.
Ironically, one of the Chrono games does have its year appear, and the other doesn't. So we'll see exactly how we get there.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing I noticed is that going through the entire list, there are no losers on this list. Even years that weren't fantastic for video games, there are still games that are regularly show up on top 50, top 10 lists.
Yeah, and also there will be probably some surprising absences. Like listeners might be listening for their favorite RPG to be mentioned over the course of 5 hours or however long this podcast takes, they might not get it because that game, even if it's excellent, was in an unlucky year. And also, I should mention our choices were pretty consistent. There are 33 years in this feature, 87 to 2019, and we only had 15 total years between all four of us. So, like, a potential 40 entries, there was enormous amounts of overlap. And when one of those years was only voted by one person in the 10th place spot. So, sort of cutting that one out, we have 14 years that were, significant to our lists. So 14 out of 33, that's a low number. The four of us overlapped a lot, and there's some level of consensus. So it's not. I don't think any of us is deeply hurt that one year finished too high or too low. Although, I mean, I don't want to say that we all had near identical lists. That's not true at all. But there was overlap, and we sort of settled on 14. So really, I mean, the title of this podcast is Top 10 Years for RPGs. That's a blatant lie. We're talking about 14 years. But we've talked too much about the list without actually listing things, so let's just go right down to it. First, we'll do these 4 honorable mention years, and we'll do those 4 in chronological order, and then once we get to 10, we'll have proper ranked list order. So let's start with 1992. Some of the significant RPGs in 1992, Speed Reading Time, Dragon Quest V, Final Fantasy V, Luna the Silver Star, Romancing Saga, Soul Blazer, Ultima 7, and Shin Megami Tensei 1. Zach, what do we think about 1992?
I mean, 1992 definitely got a vote for me, and it goes back to that quality versus quantity thing. So you've got 2 RPGs here that are just like all-time classics for me. Dragon Quest V, which is still, in my opinion, as you and I have discussed, Sollosi, my favorite Dragon Quest game. And sure, in the original version, it's not as good as maybe the remake is, because you've got 3-person parties instead of 4.
That's the biggest change.
Yeah, it's like the only real major change. Other than that, it's a great game, and the story's still intact from both. But yeah, Dragon Quest V is an incredible game. It's one of my favorite stories in RPGs, and another one of my favorite stories in RPGs is Lunar the Silver Star.
2 very romantic RPGs.
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because there was some disagreement about, I'll just say it sort of internally, I don't know where we'll be on the feature, about where these 2 should place on our other feature. And for me, Lunar is such an important, romantic, nostalgic, like sort of innocent game that like captures like a particular feeling that I don't think other RPGs have done, not even Eternal Blue, of just like adventure, and like it has such great characters that for me it's like those are 2 really, really amazing RPGs. Final Fantasy V, of course, is amazing, but those 2 were really the ones that got this a vote for me.
Yeah, the 90s feature very strongly on our top 10, but 1992 slipped through the cracks a little bit and did not finish within that top 10. Let's move on to the second honorable mention. We're going to try to go through these fast. That's 2008. Some of the good RPGs in 2008: Castlevania Order of Ecclesia, Disgaea 3, Fallout 3, The Last Remnant, Lost Odyssey, Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, Persona 4, Tales of Vesperia, Valkyria Chronicles, Knights in the Nightmare. This was on my list, and I don't think it was on anyone else's, largely because I think so highly of Persona 4, Tales of Vesperia, and Castlevania Order of Ecclesia, and I'm still haunted by the Metro system in Fallout 3. Those are the big standouts to me. But it didn't make the list, I think, just because there are so many other strong years. No 2 ways about it. But for me personally, just having my favorite Persona game and my favorite Tales game made it sort of inflated its value a little bit. And oh geez, I guess this also was I factored in the nostalgia of my Monster Hunter obsession that started in the late 2000s on the PSP. Freedom 2 and Freedom Unite were the 2 games that turned me into a Monster Hunter monster. And like Valkyria Chronicles is obviously great. We have 2 of the best 360 RPGs here. Disgaea 3, not my favorite Disgaea, but still definitely 60 hours of my time in the late 2000s. I thought 2008 was an unusually strong year, but it was Persona 4 and Tales of Vesperia that swung it for me.
I think you're right. I mean, the Castlevania games on both the GBA and the DS are amazing.
Hell of a run in the 2000s Castlevania had. Mm.
I remember playing them in 1 month. All of them in 1 month. I was doing a Halloween show at Canada's Wonderland, and it was a super long commute, so I just plowed through all of them.
That's so good, though.
I was a big Symphony of the Night fan in the late 90s, early 2000s, because of course I was. And I don't remember exactly when I jumped in on the train, but I think Circle of the Moon and Harmony of Dissonance were already out. But like, I started on those Castlevania games in the GBA, and then I basically played each one as they came out in the 2000s, and just had an absolute blast. And it solidified Castlevania as one of my favorite series. And Order of Ecclesia is one of the best ones. Shinoa is a great main character.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
All right, well, I think it's enough about 2008. Let's move on to our third honorable mention. That's 2011, which features, among others, Bastion, Dark Souls, Deus Ex Human Revolution, Disgaea 4, Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim, Blast Story, Ni no Kuni, Tales of Xillia, To the Moon, The Witcher 2. Jono, let's talk about 2011 a little bit.
Yeah, for me, this was one of those historical years that changed a lot of things, but there are actually a few games on this list that I have played a ton of. I mean, for example, Bastion was the very first Supergiant game, and it really set their stage as like an amazing developer. And I mean, right now, Hades is out, and I believe Alana is losing her mind over it.
I am losing my mind over it. It's incredible. But let's leave that for another day.
Yeah. Dark Souls came out. I mean, it's considered to be, by many, to be one of the greatest games ever made. Like you said, it's legendary. Deus Ex Human Revolution rebooted the Deus Ex series, and the original is considered, again, to be one of the greatest RPGs ever made. The Last Story, I think we talked about this on a prior podcast, Sollosi,
the Last Story was a retro encounter game from 2015 or 2016.
Yeah, and it was a key part of Operation Rainfall for the Wii. Mm-hmm. For Xenoblade Chronicles, Last Story, and Pandora's Tower. Yeah, one of those three games has made a considerably bigger impression than the other two, but
that's fair.
Yeah, To the Moon is, it took a classic RPG graphic style and applied it to a incredibly intimate story that had no combat or anything like that. But the real reason that I have 2011 on this list is because of Elder Scrolls Skyrim. I mean, I can't say this for sure, but I can't think of any other game that's been released on as many consoles as this thing.
The joke I used to tell about a game being released for everything was Final Fantasy IV. Because it would come out on everything and I would play it on everything, and which is why I somehow have played that game, I think, more than any other Final Fantasy in terms of rolling credits. But now it's Skyrim. Like, you could play Skyrim on a VR refrigerator in 2021, probably.
You can play it on Amazon Alexa.
You can.
Yeah, that's a joke, but it's true. And
now that Microsoft owns Bethesda, I think by the time we get a new version of Windows, you can play Skyrim on Excel. I think that's going to be the move.
That'd be so good. Like a old school tabletop RPG or a map or something.
Combining my love of spreadsheets with my love of RPGs. Perfect.
I mean, and there's no doubt to me that we're going to be playing Skyrim forever. It's going to come out on it's going to come out on the Series X. It's going to come out on PlayStation 5 inevitably. It's just going to be there forever. And I don't really have a problem with that because it's an amazing game.
Yeah, I've only played Skyrim once, but that's a hell of a game.
Yeah, and thanks to modding, there's going to be quality content made for that game for years and years to come. No
disagreement here. Skyrim looms large in 2011, but that year had a lot of great games. Let's move on to our final year of honorable mentions. That's 2015, which includes, among others, Bloodborne, Bravely Second, Fallout 4, Final Fantasy XIV, Heavensward, Undertale, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, The Witcher 3, Xenoblade Chronicles X, and Yakuza 0. So, Alana, 2015, a lot of favorites here.
A lot of favorites, and pretty varied as well. I mean, like, off the back of Skyrim, I would say Witcher 3 is probably pretty widely regarded as one of the best Western RPGs ever. Yeah. Like, it's an incredible feat of storytelling, of structure, of characterization, of side quests, and yeah, I would say that the 2 DLC packs for The Witcher 3 are 2 of the best DLC expansions ever, and I think, yeah, it's just... I mean, CD Projekt Red have gone from this really tiny studio to, like, the behemoths that they are now. Like, I mean, they're kind of under the radar. They went under the radar for years, and now they're kind of under the microscope, and every single thing they do now is kind of, like, watched with beady eyes. Undertale is probably my favorite game of the decade. Like, it is it's just incredible the amount of stuff they pack into, like, a 6-hour indie title. And this was kind of, like, along with a couple of other early 2010 RPGs and games, this was kind of the birth of, like, the single-person RPG, like, made by one person not entirely, like there are assets and stuff like that were made by somebody else, but yeah, there's nothing else like Undertale. Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward, I mean, like, people say A Realm Reborn was amazing, and it was, but I think Heavensward is where the MMO really came into its own, and it's so incredible. Such an incredible story, and actually, like, showed people that you could tell an incredible story in an MMO. And then you've got things like Bloodborne, which is kind of competing with Dark Souls, the original, for the best Soulsborne game ever, and it's the only one I've gotten more than a couple of hours through because I really love the gameplay of that one. But yeah, like, my experience outside of that, like, I haven't played Bravely Second. Fallout 4 is not always considered the best, but a solid continuation. Tokyo Mirage Sessions, which we covered on the podcast this year, is kind of an under-the-radar classic that so many people love. Yakuza 0, which we also covered on the podcast.
Yeah, big retro encounter year 2015.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Xenoblade Cross, which is kind of having a bit of a renaissance recently, with people discovering that it's not actually too bad, and I'd like to give that a second shot.
I mean, this game actually finished pretty high on my list personally, just because Undertale has got to be the best indie RPG of all time. Heavensward, I know everyone gives Shadowbringers like a lot of love, and it deserves it. But I think in terms of story, I still slightly prefer Heavensward. It's incredible. Bloodborne is the only Soulsborne game I've managed to get more than an hour into. I'm so bad that like more than an hour means like an hour and a half. But even I could see the art direction and the style was amazing. But The Witcher 3 is an incredible accomplishment in storytelling. I know that we tend to lean JRPG as a site, but man, The Witcher 3 it's out of this world. I don't really love Western RPGs, but the quality of its side quests alone, it's unparalleled. I think this is the only one where I'm like, oh, I kind of wish it was higher, because it's a great year.
There's going to be one Western RPG that I talk about a lot in a future entry, but I'm not a Witcher guy, but how huge it was in 2015 is undeniable. I had so much fun discovering TMS and Yakuza 0 this year for the podcast. Those are two games I was interested in, but not rabid for, but then quite thrilled with. Finally played them after finishing either of them. And I don't think it's an accident. Stormblood and Shadowbringers are made in Heavensward's image. Like, everything from the release schedule to how they position the different dungeons and quests are really following the pattern that Heavensward made, and not the pattern that Realm Reborn made. Realm Reborn made a lot of mistakes and have a lot of awkwardness in the quest design and storytelling, but then you can tell that the other expansions are building off how good Heavensward was. It's not an accident. Still, I think Shadowbringers is my favorite FF14 expansion, but Heavensward is excellent. And I mean, Bravely Second, that's a full 1/3 of the RPGs I've reviewed for the website, so of course I have affection for it.
It is.
It's a good review, too.
I like Bravely Default and Bravely Second a lot. And I thought about 2015 for my list. Like, it and one other game that ranks higher were sort of my 11th place vote getters. But ultimately I did not vote for it. But it got enough votes to at least carry an honorable mention. But let's move on to the list itself. Otherwise, we will be here all night, and I think we all have work tomorrow. So we're not recording this on a Friday, folks. Let's move on to the list proper, which, again, was a ranked list based on each of us submitting an individual top 10. So we will probably mention things like, where was this on your list, Zach? Or things of that nature. Starting with spot number 10. The year is 2004. A couple big games in 2004 are Dragon Quest VIII, Fire Emblem Sacred Stones, Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky First Chapter, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, Trials and Tribulations, Pokemon Emerald, Shadow Hearts Covenant, SMP Digital Devil Saga, Vampire the Masquerade, World of Warcraft. This ranked very highly for me. Only 2 of us voted for it, but it's in huge part because of Dragon Quest VIII, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, my favorite Phoenix Wright game, the third one, Shadow Hearts Covenant, and Digital Devil Saga. Those are 5 games I love. Love.
Yeah, and I think as well, like, you can't understate World of Warcraft at all in this year, and I think that's maybe why it snuck on. I haven't played it, but World of Warcraft is still going in 2020, so it's got to be, that's got to mean something. And Dragon Quest VIII is, like, the first Dragon Quest game that really made a big splash in the West. Like, it was the first one we got in Europe, and I remember freaking out over it because I was like, oh my god, finally a Dragon Quest game, and I loved every single second of it. Yeah, for similar reasons to you, I also voted for it. I placed it 9th, so not too high, mostly because, like, I think some other Dragon Quests have kind of prevailed over it, like 5 and 11, but Thousand Year Door, Trails in the Sky First Chapter, Shadow Heart's Covenant, which is personal choice, yeah, it's a great year. And again, the best Phoenix Wright game, which I will totally agree with you on.
Yeah, I'm on the same page about that too. It's so good.
It's really good. Like, I think all of the Phoenix Wright games are at least good, but Trials and Tribulations felt like such a culmination of the previous two and just delivered the drama so enormously, especially in the last two cases. I think it's still the best one over a decade later. And we should mention, this is the Japanese GBA release date for Trials and Tribulations. Yes. It came out, I think, 4 or 5 years later on the DS worldwide. But the first 3 Phoenix Wright games started out on the GBA. And, I mean, Digital Devil Saga is I think, my favorite Atlas game that isn't named Persona. That game's excellent. And World of Warcraft, I was a huge fan of Warcraft 2 and 3, and never played World of Warcraft, in part because I was afraid of what it might do to me. But I actually followed the story of World of Warcraft by reading things like news articles and wikis, just because I wanted to see, what happened to characters like Jaina and Arthas. So I have some level of weird investment into World of Warcraft, even though I've never played it. And like Alana said, it's so hugely influential and successful that you kind of can't ignore it on a list like this.
Yeah, although I think most people on RPG Fan would consider Final Fantasy XIV to be their MMORPG of choice.
Yeah, me too.
Historically, World of Warcraft, like, I lost a full summer to that game. It just ate. I don't even remember that summer. It just ate all my time, and eventually I just got annoyed that I couldn't do instances by myself because I was such a single player gamer. Yeah, I just kind of stopped playing it. Eventually, I just let my subscription run out, and I haven't played it since. But every now and then I look at it. There's an upcoming expansion, and I look and I think,
I know friends that lost years to World of Warcraft, and there's even, and this person is not my friend, but a very popular commentator in the fighting game community actually was so addicted to World of Warcraft he had to temporarily retire and unretire, and even went into something like a rehab program for weaning himself of that game, which is crazy to think about. But aside from its addictive qualities, it is. So many games are trying to get a piece of that MMO pie because of World of Warcraft. It wasn't the first MMO, but it was the first one that had really a global level of super success, I feel.
Well, joint with Final Fantasy XI, I think, but World of Warcraft definitely had the wider scope, maybe, at the time, because a lot of people were still like, oh, Final Fantasy's a single-player RPG, and then 11 comes along and throws all that out the window, kind of thing.
And, well, if you want to get weird, you can talk about things like RuneScape or EverQuest, which predate World of Warcraft. I don't think any of them had the numbers, the global impact of WoW. That you really can't deny it.
No, and I mean Blizzard had the experience too with Diablo, and a lot of the stuff they took from Diablo and put straight into World of Warcraft, and it translated really, really well.
The 4th campaign in Warcraft 3 Frozen Throne is kind of a single-player-ish segment of Warcraft 3, and like World of Warcraft, I think they even said that creating a game more like that is sort of like that was almost like a World of Warcraft 0. They had been sort of toying. Yeah, they had been toying around with like a loot RPG like Diablo in a Warcraft setting for way longer than just the difference between 2002 and 2004. But
was that the one? Was that the DLC with Thrall?
Well, yeah, the expansion is Frozen Throne, and the Thrall chapter of Frozen Throne is what I'm referring to, yes.
Yeah, I had a great time playing that. Mm-hmm. Warcraft 3 is such a great game.
Oh, I love Warcraft 3. It's a... this is not a WoW podcast or a Warcraft 3 podcast. We should move on to the next year. So finishing 9th in our top 10 years for RPGs is 2010. So some of the great games in 2010, Danganronpa 1, Fallout New Vegas, Ghost Trick, Kingdom Hearts, Birth by Sleep, Mass Effect 2, the first Nier, Pokemon Black and White, Radiant Historia, Resonance of Fate, Space Funerals, Xenoblade Chronicles, and Etrian Odyssey 3. I did vote for this game, and... The biggest mover and shaker is Xenoblade Chronicles. I think that's really one of the best RPGs of the past 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's got some depth to it too. I mean, Xenoblade Chronicles for me is the clear cut winner. I mean, it's just the way that it blends. In some ways, and I guess I've just sort of thought of this, like it blends MMO concepts onto a single-player RPG, which is sort of the opposite of what 14 is doing, where it pulls some great single-player concepts in. But just the scope of its world, the exploration, it's so much simpler than previous Xeno stories, but it's still an incredible story. But other games in this year, like Nier has its jank, but Nier is a phenomenal story. Like it's got a great story. Mass Effect 2, which again, I know we tend to slant a little Japanese here in terms of JRPGs, but Mass Effect 2 is generally regarded as one of the best games of that generation, maybe the best game of that generation.
Mass Effect 2 is awesome.
Yeah, it's got great shooting mechanics. It feels less RPG than the first one, but it is definitely a superior game. And Birth by Sleep has got the best Kingdom Hearts story as well.
Yeah.
I personally, there's a lot of games in this year I haven't played, but Fallout New Vegas is one of my favorite games of all time. And what's really remarkable about Fallout New Vegas to me is how they had to rush it. Contractually, they had to rush it, and just how much even bigger that game would have been if they even had an extra couple of months of development time. But as is, I think it's still one of the most popular Fallout games out there.
Yeah, looking at this list at a personal level, Xenoblade Chronicles, Danganronpa 1, and Ghost Trick are all games that have appeared on Retro Encounter. I'm a huge fan of Mass Effect 2. I played Mass Effect 1 and 2 late, but it was Mass Effect 2 that sort of made me so hyped for the 2012 Mass Effect 3 year, which I played on launch. Pokemon Black and White, Gen 5 is my favorite Pokemon generation, so I have a lot of affection for that one. Yeah, I haven't played Birth by Sleep or Nier, but I sort of want to, and knowing how well loved those games are probably was a factor in me voting for this on my list. 2010 is a really strong year.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and also, I had a really, really great time talking about Ghost Trick with you on 2 episodes of Retro a while back.
Yeah, a little bit less than a year ago. I think that was late 2019.
Yeah, that was fun.
And we did the Xenoblade episode, I think was 2016. Oh man, it's 1,000 years ago.
But I think that Radiant Historia deserves a mention as well. I mean, I think that the way that it deals with time travel mechanics is probably the second best RPG for time travel mechanics. The other one might appear later. But I love the battle system of that game. The story is strong. The characters are good. In terms of mobile RPGs, it feels really rich and dense.
Well, I mean, mobile RPGs, mobile versus handheld can be a bit of a loaded term. It's a DS RPG, but an extremely excellent one. Great Yoko Shimomura soundtrack also.
Yeah.
Ooh, what's a better Yoko soundtrack, Alana? Birth by Sleep or Radiant Historia?
Oh, Radiant Historia.
Oh, okay.
And Radiant Historia is even better than Xenoblade Chronicles. It's like her contributions to that. Well, it is, because she doesn't do all the music to Xenoblade Chronicles.
Xenoblade Chronicles was like 7 people.
I'm not counting Ace Plus's stuff, because Ace Plus's stuff on Xenoblade Chronicles is the standout, isn't it?
Yep.
Like, yeah. I'm the only person who didn't vote for 2010, I should probably say. I feel a bit bad. It was one of the ones I was juggling around with 2015 and 1993, I think. I couldn't justify it. I love Xenoblade Chronicles. Again, probably second favorite RPG of the decade. And I love Nier, and I love Pokemon Black and White. It's my second favorite gen. I love Danganronpa. Birth by Sleep is like my second favorite Kingdom Hearts game. And Fallout New Vegas, I acknowledge is one of the best Fallout games. But I don't know why it didn't make my list. It was one of those ones that I kind of had to cut, sadly, and was very disappointed with myself now, looking at this.
It did make my list, but this one was sort of quantity was a factor. Like, I love Mass Effect 2 and Xenoblade Chronicles, but aside from those, there was also like 6 or 7 games on the list that I either liked or acknowledged as being great. So this one, it finished on my list, but sort of low on my list, but it was some quality, a lot of quantity. It was 2010 is a strong year. Everything in the top 10 is a strong year. We're getting weird.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the kind of year that everyone really, really likes, but it's no one's favorite.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, and this next year is a little bit different from 2010. Only 2 people put it on their list, but it was medium to high on both lists, which is how it scored so highly. The year is 2012, and a couple of the big games in 2012 are Bravely Default, Danganronpa 2, Diablo 3, Fire Emblem Awakening, Mass Effect 3, Pokemon Black 2 and White 2, Torchlight 2, Ys Memories of Celceta, The Walking Dead Telltale, Zero Escape Virtue's Last Reward. I won't beat around the bush. This game finished 4th on my list. It finished super high because literally every single game on that list that I just mentioned is a game I played and either really liked or really loved. I mean, like these are all Sollosi games, all of them.
They are.
It's a weird coincidence how that happened. But I can either, for every game in that 2012 list, I can either rank it among my all-time favorites or remember a time when I played it and how that was just a really great 3 or 4 weeks being obsessed with that game for a while. There's a number of retro encounter games here. Danganronpa 2, Diablo 3, and Virtue's Last Reward all had dedicated episodes. And I had a run of playing a bunch of Telltale games, and that started with The Walking Dead. When I was playing every East game back-to-back in the 2013-14 range, Memories of Celceta was included in there. Mass Effect 3 is not my favorite Mass Effect game or BioWare game, but I had a lot of fun playing that in like release week and being the part of the hype for that. Fire Emblem Awakening is probably my second or third favorite Fire Emblem game and rekindled my interest in the series after I was pretty disenchanted with the DS ones. Danganronpa 2 is my favorite Danganronpa game. Virtue's Last Reward is my favorite Uchikoshi game. I adore Bravely Default. Jono, maybe we should podcast about it sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to.
But weirdly, the game that maybe looms the largest for me personally in this whole list is Diablo 3. Because for maybe longer than 2 years, I'm not sure exactly how long, that was my comfort game. I would go home, put on a podcast or an album, and just play a bunch of Diablo 3. And it does not have a great story, and I uninstalled it from my PC after Blizzard were a bunch of jerks in 2019. But that is a game that I have so much affection for everything from its class design to its dungeon design to its loot, its loot hunt, to the arcade nature of adjusting difficulty and playing exactly to your preference and level of intensity. I miss Diablo 3 for having it uninstalled from my PC for about a year, and that's a weird thing to say. Like Diablo 3 is one of my favorite games of the 2010s, and it was a huge factor in putting this 2012 in my top 4. Well, it finished exactly 4th. I'm not going to beat around the bush.
Yeah, the year for me, I adore this year too. It ended up as 7th on my list, and I'm pretty much there with you on Diablo 3. This was during a golden age where Blizzard could do absolutely no wrong in terms of what they were making. It's just such an incredible run of games that they were churning out over and over again. I do remember the launch controversy of Diablo 3 though. Oh, that was a nightmare.
It was one of if it wasn't for Final Fantasy XIV, Diablo 3 would be the best reclamation project of the past 10 years.
Yeah, but that's the thing. What they did with it after that is kind of remarkable.
I didn't start playing it until after the expansion, where it sort of became its own thing. But that transformation is just sort of part of the Diablo 3 story that makes it so impressive.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I remember downloading Diablo 3 and playing it, and I liked it. I didn't love it, and I found that Torchlight 2 for me was a really nice antidote to it for that year. I think Torchlight 2 is a great game. It's a great sequel to the original, really built on everything that was presented in Torchlight. I understand that it's a shame that they didn't do the same thing with Torchlight 3, but I guess we'll see when its full release comes out in a few weeks.
Yeah, Torchlight 3 has had a troubled alpha period and beta testing period, you could say. I'm not sure what to think about Torchlight 3.
Yeah, wasn't it supposed to be Torchlight Online or something like that? It
was originally going to be an MMO, and then they sort of scaled that back and said it was going to be kind of like an MMO, and now they're saying, no, it's its own thing, but you can definitely play it online. And it has been, response has been mixed to the beta period for Torchlight 3, but sticking to Torchlight 2, I think Torchlight 1 was sort of an improved Diablo 1, and Torchlight 2 is an improved Diablo 2, which is not surprising since like the Schaefer brothers and a few others of whom the original Diablo team were part of Runic Games that made Torchlight 1 and 2. And like I don't think I ever need to play Diablo 2 again unless I really want to, make another Concentrate Barbarian or something, because Torchlight 2 does Diablo 2 so much better. But Diablo 3 is its own thing, especially with like the instance nature of dungeons and how the loot hunt and sort of character building with really weird twists like Kanai's Cube letting you delete armor pieces so their ghosts can stay on you, sort of. like Diablo 3 is its own incredibly fascinating flow of a loot RPG or a class-based action RPG. And with Diablo 2 and Diablo 3, I'm sorry, with Torchlight 2 and Diablo 3 in the same year, I can sort of have both versions of Diablo that I really like playing. And I still have, I did not delete Torchlight 2 from my PC, and I played that as recently as earlier this month.
I'll tell you something else about Diablo 3. It still looks real pretty. That game has such a beautiful design.
Yeah.
Its graphic style is just, even if it was released today, I think some people would be like, oh, it could be better, but I think the artists that were working on it, they did a remarkable job. Yeah,
Blizzard sort of famously tries to design their games to be able to run on as many machines as possible, which is why World of Warcraft did not look stunningly beautiful in 2004, but like, so it's designed for access and for clarity, and I think because of that, you could play Diablo 3 on any laptop nowadays, and it still looks at least pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, and finally, Bravely Default for me, I agree with you. I love it. It revitalized the classic Final Fantasy style of RPG, right down to using the crystals. And I know that you and I differ about our opinions of the end of the game. Personally, I loved it. It really played to my love of alternate realities and stuff like that. But
who said I didn't love it?
Oh, I thought that we had an argument about that one time.
Oh, no. I mean, you could have argued about a bunch of people about that, but not me. I think Bravely Default's its penchant for repetition is sort of designed to annoy you as it's happening, but then they justify it with sort of the concept that they're trying to introduce for the finale. It's I accept the penchant for repetition in Bravely Default and Bravely Second.
Okay, yeah, we're on the same page then. I get why people don't like it, but I love it.
I heard you argue with Nathan about it on an episode of Random. Maybe that's what you're talking about.
Maybe? I argued with a few
But talking
people
about
about
alternate
it.
dimensions and time travel, Zach says Radiant Historia is the second best time travel RPG.
Yeah,
I disagree.
Now that you say that,
It might be Zero Escape Virtue's Last Reward.
Yeah, VLRs. Man, I actually think I like 999 a little bit better, but the scope of Virtue's Last Reward and the quality of the puzzles along with that, and the characters, and just like I had no idea what was happening in that game throughout until the end, and just it all locks into place in a really amazing way. It follows through on what 999 does well, really, like, at least for most of its runtime, really well. I don't think the twist at the end is quite as impactful, and maybe part of that is that I don't think that the third one follows up on its premise as effectively as I would hope, but it's still just an incredible VN adventure puzzle game.
Totally agree, and we are in danger of falling behind, so we got to move on. Finishing 7th in our list of the top 10 years for RPGs is 2006, which again, similar to last year, only 2 people voted for it, but they were 2 very high votes. And among the best games in 2006 are Baten Kaido's Origins, Disgaea 2, Elder Scrolls 4, Oblivion, Final Fantasy 12, Kingdom Hearts 2, Legend of Heroes Tears in the Sky, Second Chapter, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, Mother 3, Okami, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, Persona 3, Suikoden 5, Valkyrie Profile 2, Xenosaga Episode 3, and Ys Origin. So, it finished in the top 4 for both Zach and Alana. So, Alana, let's talk about 2006 a bit.
So this was a bit of this was one of the most difficult years to vote for, I think, personally. I remember when we were doing, internal votes and people were, picking their favorite RPG from that year. And this was probably the year that came up the most. You've got Kingdom Hearts 2, which is arguably the best Kingdom Hearts game. Trails in the Sky Second Chapter is arguably the best Kiseki game. Mother 3 is amazing. Okami is maybe the better Zelda game out of the 2 Zelda games that came out that year. Persona 3 is where Persona really modernized and became this whole, multi-life, you've got your school life and your dungeon crawling life. It really changed that series. You've got the last mainline Suikoden game, I should say. Ys Origin is hugely popular and one of the best Ys games in the franchise. And Oblivion, which again is another really fantastic Western RPG. Personally, I think I put Mother 3 as my favorite just because, Jesus Christ, what a game. And I mean, you can hear about that from a few months ago. Another retro episode there. Cameo. But yeah, this was just a sheer mix of there's quality and quantity. There's so much that I love, but probably more that I like, which is, it's why it came in my top 5. It was 4. And yeah, like even games that I don't love, like Disgaea and Oblivion personally, I don't love Okami or Twilight Princess either. And I've never played Valkyrie Profile 2 and Xenosaga, but and Suikoden 5 either. But yeah, like this is like, if you put that list in front of anybody, like I'm actually surprised that not everybody voted for this year. I'm genuinely quite surprised. But I suppose, Sollosi, I know why you didn't vote for it with Kingdom Hearts 2 there, so...
Yeah, as much as I love Okami and Persona 3, Kingdom Hearts is sort of like takes away one of those votes. It's like cancels it out.
But you voted for Birth by Sleep year, so you've got no excuse.
No, I really don't. I mentioned that there was a couple years that sort of finished 11th that I considered for the 9 or 10 spots. It was 2006 and 2015 were those years. I really like Twilight Princess, Final Fantasy XII, Pokemon Diamond Pearl, and I love Okami, Persona 3, and Mother 3. But there was just more games I loved in the years that finished in the 7, 8, 9, 10 range for me. Again, this was one of the last years I cut on my personal list, but I don't want to take anything away from it. It's a really excellent year.
For me, this is the deepest year probably on the list. And there are games that I love on this list. I mean, I love Final Fantasy XII. I love Mother 3. I love Suikoden 5. And there are games that I like. I really love Kingdom Hearts 2. I'm going to be honest. Kingdom Hearts 2 is a great game. But there are other games that have reputations that I haven't played that I desperately want to play, like Xenosaga Episode 3, if I can ever find an affordable copy. Okami, Persona 3 is like the Persona game that is still like my gap game. But in Kaidos, I mean, like there is so much happening this year. There is such a depth to it, but you know, it's also kind of top heavy. I mean, like Mother 3 is, oh man, that's a game. That is a game. And Suikoden 5, it's not Suikoden 2, but damn, it's a great game. It's a really, really deep year.
I think it's interesting that this is also a transition year because Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion is probably the first great Xbox 360 RPG. And a lot of these games like Disgaea 2, Okami, Persona 3 are late era PS2 games. Like this is
Twilight Princess was a dual console release as well.
Yeah.
It was GameCube and Wii.
Yeah, I remember the map was flipped because they had to make Link right-handed for the Wii version.
Yeah, I had the Wii version.
The first right-handed Link.
Yeah, but I played it on GameCube, but the I don't remember the sort of like the version of the game the package that my game came with had the Wii version of the map, so everything. So my GameCube game and the Wii map had everything flipped. So the like west and east was flipped on the map basically. So it was kind of amazing that even happened. But so we have a lot of late era PS2 and GBA games, maybe only Mother 3 for GBA, and a couple early generation PS Wii 60 era. That makes 2006 sort of an interesting transition year that just, I think, especially had just a lot of strong PS2 and GameCube games on it.
Yeah, there are, like, I'm looking at the list, and there are some amazing games here. The only reason it didn't appear on my list is 2006 is, I think everyone has, like, a Dark Age year, or a couple of Dark Age years, where I was in my second year of music theater school. I didn't have time. I wasn't in my apartment for more than, like, 4 hours at a time that year, and that was for sleep. So I just didn't play games that year at all. So I recognize everything on the list, and I recognize it as great, but I don't really have any personal opinions about any of the games on it.
Right, yeah, this is probably the year I really, really, really started to get into RPGs personally, like the late 2000s. I was getting into them in the 2000s anyway, but like 2006 was like high school, like trying to find friends who played them as well, and it was really the time where I started to like, well, this is what I love, and this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to stick with and run with it.
I think I was still playing PS1 games in 2006, but
So was I, yeah.
I played a lot of these games late, but still just evaluating each of these games sort of at how much I love them in 2020. It was strong, but not the highest finisher. But also, I haven't played Xenosaga 3, Suikoden 5, Kingdom Hearts 2, Oblivion. A lot of these really good games.
It also, I personally find it that Mother 3 not getting released year after year, it's just getting funnier and funnier at this point. It's just...
Well, I've already played it, so I can wait now. Yeah.
Oh, I know, but I feel like it's got to be a joke, like deep within Nintendo, that they just think it's the funniest thing in the world that they do not really re-release Mother 3 in English.
So 2026 will be the 20th anniversary, so we'll get it then.
Speaking of Mother 3, this is a pretty heavy retro encounter year. We got Mother 3 Okami, Persona 3, Suikoden 5, Final Fantasy 12. And there is an episode on Trails in the Sky SC from years and years ago. So yeah, this is a pretty good retro encounter year.
I guess the last thing I'll say about it is that what I find most impressive about it is this was also like a dark age of RPGs for me, and that I've come back to like a huge majority of these, and the ones I haven't come back to, I need to come back to, which is what makes it maybe even stronger in my mind. But the next year was not a dark age of RPGs for me.
Oh no, we are at the 6th place right now in our top 10 list, and there's going to be a lot of 90s in the top 6. Let me tell you, after living in the 21st century for the first 4 in the top 10. So 6th place finishing year is 1994. All 4 of us voted for this. And I should mention the top 6. All 4 of us voted for all of the top 6, which is where those commonalities in our lists start becoming very obvious. But some of the great games Some of the great games in 1994 include Breath of Fire 2, Beyond Oasis, Earthbound, Final Fantasy VI, Langrisser 2, Live Alive, Lunar Eternal Blue, Robotrex, Shining Force CD, Shin Megami Tensei 2. And I'm just going to open up right away. I've played 4 of these games, which are Breath of Fire 2, and then 3 certified all-time bangers, Earthbound, Final Fantasy VI, and Lunar 2, Eternal Blue. Those last 3 are why I put this around the middle of my top 10 list. It's 1 game I like and 3 games I love. That was enough to just pencil it in immediately and never have it leave the top 10.
I mean, I agree with you. Those 3 are all-timers. Voting for this year was hard for me in our feature. But Breath of Fire 2 is also my favorite Breath of Fire game. It was like my first Kill God JRPG because it had finally gotten through the censors, I think. And
the demons of the church all along.
Yeah, I still have a lot of affection for that game as a result. But yeah, I mean, Lunar Eternal Blue, I might prefer 1, but oh man, and then obviously the other 2 speak for themselves. I mean, and Rubber Trek is kind of a fun game, actually. It's a little underrated.
Honestly, if Final Fantasy VI was the only game released that year, it would still 1994 would still arguably be on this list.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, like Final Fantasy VI and Earthbound are the reason it got on my list because I haven't played Lunar yet, but what do you do if you were to recommend some RPGs for someone to play on the Super Nintendo? Aren't they like 2 of the first 3 you would recommend somebody? Surely.
Yeah. They're part of Square's incredible run from 94 to 96 that still haunts my dreams, where they came out with like Final Fantasy VI, Seiken Densetsu 3, Chrono Trigger, and Mario RPG like in the same 18 months or something. And Earthbound. I would say Earthbound and maybe Dragon Quest V are the best non-Square RPGs on the SNES. I don't know. Maybe there's some Lufia 2 fans out there that are banging down my door with a hatchet. But
it's because I'm surprised. Do you like Lufia 2 as well?
I like Lufia 2 a lot. Yeah, it turns out I love the SNES RPGs oeuvre a lot. Final Fantasy VI and Earthbound are 2 of the signature Super Nintendo RPGs, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Both of them have been on the podcast. So has Lunar 2. And like anyone interested in that era, those are 2 of the first few you recommend. You're absolutely right, Alana.
Right, yeah, and they're so different as well. Like, Earthbound is like, I know Earthbound's regarded for its humor and its writing and things like that, and at the time it wasn't really highly regarded because, silly marketing campaigns and whatever. But it's so interesting, and it's so forward-thinking and so modern, like, well-written and so I don't know, it's just great. I just loved every second of it. And Final Fantasy VI, like, how on earth do you balance 14 characters as well as that game does? Like, obviously there's some that don't get enough attention and others that just come in at the end, but Jesus, I think Final Fantasy VI still makes a case for having one of the best Final Fantasy stories of all time just because of how well balanced that main cast are and how politically charged it was for the year it came out in as well. Like, it's such an important and shocking game to play. Like, if you don't know what's going to happen going into it, like, that halfway point is really going to kind of kick you in the face and take you by surprise. And personally, it does a lot of things right for me, like on an emotional level and a personal level. So, yeah, it's super, super important. And Live Alive is really unusual as well. Like, I've never played it.
I was about to say that, yeah.
But, like, it's got such an unusual structure to it. Like, this feels like a really experimental year in a way as well. Like, you've got Earthbound's strange sense of humor, you've got Final Fantasy VI's massive cast, and then you've got Live Alive, which I think is 7 different stories and different characters and different time periods, and you have to play through them all and then get this true ending. It's just a really interesting year for being kind of going towards the end of the Super Nintendo's life. It's not quite there, but we're in the comfortable stages of it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, even the games that are on this particular list that aren't like Final Fantasy VI or Earthbound, Beyond Oasis is an absolutely terrific RPG, action RPG. It's super fun. I love playing it. Robotrek, again, it's certainly nothing that knocks the ball out of the park, but it's a fun game to play. Live Alive, I mean, rumor has it Live Alive might be coming out in this region.
Yeah, there was a
yeah.
trademark applied for in regions outside Japan, which has a lot of people excited about that. Langrisser 2 Langrisser had some recent mobile versions that re-sparked interest in them, and Langrisser 2 is a pioneering strategy RPG that probably belongs in the same breath as the Super Nintendo Fire Emblem games and maybe Tactics Ogre. And Shin Megami Tensei 2 is the SMT fans that go way back talk about the sort of conflict between law and order in that game a lot as being really impressive, and I think it's more well regarded than SMT1, but I haven't played it.
No, I haven't either, but I know it's really popular.
Yeah.
I do want to play Lunar as well. It makes me so sad I can't talk about it at the moment. I will be.
Unlike Zach, I prefer Lunar 2 to Lunar 1. I think it's just a stunningly great RPG. I had so much fun playing that for
I agree with the second part of
that.
that statement.
I'm on the same page as you, Sollosi. Like, that's the thing. I don't think anyone here would argue that Lunar 1 is a bad game.
No.
It's brilliant. But I think Lunar 2 the story touched me a heck of a lot more. The love story in Lunar 2 specifically really hit me where I live.
The story that hit me in Lunar 2 is the mysterious masked swordsman character that joins you, who most definitely doesn't resemble anyone else.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have no idea who that guy is.
Don't spoil anything.
I mean, it's been 16 years and they still haven't told us who the masked guy is. It's crazy.
And I mean, also Lunar, it's a part of our legacy for RPG fan. So, gotta mention that.
The former lunarnet.com. But
Exactly.
anyway, we don't want to become the former podcast known as a Retro Encounter and have this, have this 3-hour monster end my career as a podcaster. So we're going to move on to the 5th place year. We're living in the 90s again with 1997. And among the great games of 1997, including a few you've probably heard of, are Alundra, Breath of Fire 3, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Fallout, Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy Tactics, Grandia, Mega Man Legends, Saga Frontier, Shining Force 3, Tales of Destiny. So, remarkably, you have my least favorite Tales game that I've played and my favorite Final Fantasy game that I've played. But there's
Oh, I didn't know 7 was your favorite.
No, Tactics is.
Oh, Tactics. Right, sorry. Oh my god.
I adore Final Fantasy Tactics. It's what introduced me to strategy RPGs and eventually kindled interest in Fire Emblem and Disgaea, among others. The story is amazing. Delita is one of the all-time great RPG characters, in my opinion. The gameplay is super satisfying once you sort of get over the hump of what the F is going on, JP, squares, direction, I don't know. It also... Castlevania Symphony of the Night, not my first Castlevania game. I played a lot of the SNES and SNES ones. But playing this, Castlevania went from, those were a couple pretty good rentals 20 years ago or 10 years ago, into, oh my god, I need to play every Castlevania game now. This is unbelievable.
Yeah, this changed my world, Symphony of the Night. I love this game to death. And it's like somebody at Konami was like, oh, Super Metroid's a great game. Why don't we put RPG elements into it? And they created a monster and a whole genre out of it, really. Like, how many Symphony of the Night clones have there been since? Like, hundreds? Enough that,
I mean, just within Castlevania, there's got to be 7 or 8. I'd have to check a list. But without Symphony of the Night, we don't get Shadow Complex or Time Spinner or a bunch of other really, really excellent games. And in terms of influence, Final Fantasy VII. I mean, my God, this was the first RPG for so many people on their PlayStations in the late 90s. And Alana, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't that the first Final Fantasy game that came out in Europe?
It was the first official Final Fantasy game we got in Europe, yeah. I hate it. I don't hate the game, I hate that. I hate that was the first one we got.
We figured.
And it indirectly also gave us probably one of 2020's best RPGs. Am I allowed to say that? The FF7's legacy has been so huge, from it, like how good it was on its own, to the compilation of Final Fantasy VII games in the 21st century, to the FF7 remake in 2020. just the legacy and reach of that game is just astounding.
Yeah. Something I've noticed I want to point out is, like, this is kind of a year where we've got, like, you know, we're moving on to the 3D generation of consoles, but we've still got this mix of, like, sprite-based art as well as, like, 3D art as well, and I think it's really cool. Like, Grandia uses a bit of both. Symphony of the Night is entirely in 2D, and then you've got things like Final Fantasy VII and Mega Man Legends, which use this kind of, like, polygonal art style, and it's a really cool mix. It's a really cool way to see, like, these kind of games evolve, I think.
Alana, you...
For me,
go ahead.
No,
you go ahead, Jono. Go.
I mean, this was much higher on my list than where you guys put it. I had it as second, and I think the reason for me why I had it as second is arguably 1997 is it's probably, in my opinion, it might be the most important year in RPG history. I think that 1997 is the year that everything changed for RPG in terms of how they were perceived by the public, their popularity. And yes, a lot of that is due to Final Fantasy VII. Like, Final Fantasy VI, you know, everyone likes it, but it never exploded on the SNES. Final Fantasy VII blew the top off the place. Symphony of the Night, I mean, it created its entire genre, like you said, Metroidvania. Tactics completely revitalized and revolutionized the RPG strategy game. Fallout, same thing with turn-based storytelling and things like that on the PC. It's just a year that changed everything. And because of that, it's the reason why it's so high up on my list. I think, historically speaking, it's hard to beat.
I mean, I agree with that. I guess for me, and I think I put it the lowest of any of us. I think I put it 8th. I mean, Final Fantasy Tactics is really the reason that it still got my vote. And if I hadn't played Symphony of the Night in the last, I don't know, year, I don't think I would have voted for it. And it's because, maybe it's just, this is, again, personal preference. Like, I don't disagree with you. I think 97 is the most important year. But, like, Final Fantasy VII, while it's still a good game, like the OG one, like, it doesn't hold up the way that it used to. I'm not being a hater by any means. I think it's still a great game. But I would still take a lot of Final Fantasy games over it. And you know, I guess for me, like, I'm looking at the games as they are, and I think there are 2 great games this year, and then there are 2 other games that have not aged very well, and there are some other games that I just don't think are actually very good. Like Alundra is very frustrating. Saga Frontier is also very frustrating, although it's got amazing art. So I guess for me, that's why I put it where I did.
I have a feeling I know who put Alundra and Saga Frontier on this list, but we don't need to name names.
I can't believe I just missed out a chance on bashing Saga games. I can't believe I missed that.
You missed one earlier as well.
There was a Romancing Saga reference earlier, right? Yeah.
Oh, don't worry, my favorite's coming up soon.
In terms of retro encounter, we got some here. Castlevania Symphony of the Night, FF Tactics, Grandia, Mega Man Legends. I sort of wasn't that impressed with Mega Man Legends when I finally played through it for the first time about a year ago. Maybe it was 2 years ago. I've lost track of what years.
2018.
Yeah,
it was October 2018.
So right around right at 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But Alana, how much you were talking about how a lot of these games blend 2D and 3D. How about those Capcom late 90s sprite animations in Breath of Fire 3 and 4?
You know how much I love them. I have such a soft spot for 90s sprite work. I'm playing a game at the moment, we're playing on Retro, that I'm in love with the sprite work with on the Sega Genesis. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of it. I just love sprite work so much. It's so cool. I mean, there are other years that have got, you know, indie games that use sprite work and things like that, but there's something really, really special about this kind of blend of art styles that the console revolution was going through, you know, like where's the balance kind of thing. And the PS2 kind of moves into 3D more, but then you start getting the indie developers to go off with that kind of style thing. So, yeah, it's so cool.
Now, for the next game on our list, finishing in 4th place, we're only moving ahead 1 year, so there's still plenty of great sprite work to talk about, Alana. 1998 finishes 4th in our list of the 10 best years of RPGs. All 4 of us voted for it, and some of the great games in 1998 include Baldur's Gate, Brigandine, Dragon Quest Monsters, Fallout 2, Grim Fandango, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, Panzer Dragoon Saga, Parasite Eve, Pokemon Yellow, Star Ocean 2, Suikoden 2, and Xenogears. Suikoden 2 and Xenogears, you want to talk about some beautiful sprite work. Oh my goodness gracious.
Xenogears less, but yeah, Suikoden 2's got
Like-
the blue
like,
rat and the bone dragon.
Like, I think that the player characters have really cool, smooth martial arts movements in Xenogears, yeah. But the sprites in Suikoden 2, especially for the bosses and for the 80 or so playable characters that you recruit. I know it's 108 total, but like some of them are, blacksmiths or shopkeepers that don't fight. The sprite work and animations is like chef's kiss late 90s video games.
Star Ocean 2's got some cool
Yeah,
sprite
it does.
work as well. Yeah.
The action sequences in that are cool because of the sprite work too.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about some 3D effects, like Ocarina of Time, maybe even more so than a Mario 64, like made me believe in Nintendo 3D. Seeing that for the first time. It's not my favorite Zelda game. It's probably not even a top 5 Zelda game for me, but it might be one of the most important video games Nintendo has ever produced.
I think it made me believe in 3D period, actually. Not just for Nintendo. Like every Zelda game and actually every action RPG after Ocarina of Time, they owe it a huge debt.
Yeah.
I mean,
I would agree with that.
its camera is functional in 1998, which is already saying something because there are games with bad cameras in 2020. But the Z targeting in Ocarina of Time feels so influential to me. Like being able to fix on a certain point and have your camera rotate around it is something that is in every important 3D game now. Like if you can't sort of focus strafe or lock on, then whatever action 3D game you're playing becomes way more frustrating.
Yeah, the problem with playing a game like Ocarina of Time now, unless you're playing it on the 3DS, the remake, is it's kind of like when you see the very first iPod, and you're like, it's the size of a deck of cards. It's frigging, heavy and huge. It has a spinning hard drive in it. It holds like not a whole lot of songs. You really have to remember that it was how influential it was and how everything that came after it was impacted by it. I think Ocarina of Time, I'm with you on that, by the way. I wouldn't be on like my top 5 Zelda games, but in terms of what it did for the Zelda franchise, it's probably one of the most important Zelda games.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to sound like a hypocrite here, but that was one of the reasons I voted for this year was because of the significance of Ocarina of Time. But obviously, Suikoden 2 and Xenogears are amazing to me because they have 2 of the greatest RPG stories of all time, but they do it in such vastly different ways that, like, I think that's amazing. Like, Suikoden 2 has a very, easy to understand storyline, but it has great characters. With like lots of different complex motivations, but you can follow it. Xenogears, the first time I played it, I was like, what? I have no idea what's happening here. And I played it again after a couple years later, and I was like, all right, I understand what's happening here. But like, Parasite Eve is also really influential in terms of like blending action and RPG elements in a really fascinating way, and shooting elements. Like, Mass Effect doesn't exist without Parasite Eve, probably.
Yeah, and shooting and horror elements too.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
Yeah, Parasite Eve did not deserve its Square's Resident Evil, I think was what a lot of people were calling it back then.
Parasite Eve 2,
that's what it
though.
turned
Parasite
into.
Eve 2 kind of is Square's Resident Evil.
It is, yeah. I mean, Parasite Eve as well was technically a tech demo for Final Fantasy VIII, so yeah. But it's so cool. It's cooler than Final Fantasy VIII as well. And I wanna give a shout out to Grim Fandango as well because like I know we played it for retro and I find it really frustrating, but I do think it's one of the best written and funniest games I've ever played in my life, and I still think about it today. And also, Panzer Dragoon Saga is like the kind of the rare gem that everybody always wants to play. And I was rewatching some videos on it because I played it as a kid and don't remember too much about it. And Jesus Christ, the stuff they get out of the Sega Saturn on that game is incredible. It's like, I don't know, it's like watching aerial flights in like, I don't know, some prototype flight simulator from like the 90s or some like, it's really a feat. It's incredible.
It's my white whale at this point. I mean, if I could play that game.
It's a hell of a white whale to have.
Oh man, it's never going to happen. But I want
it's one of mine also, mostly because of the lack of access to that game.
Yeah.
But now that Sega's pretty excited about remaking their old stuff, I hope Panzer Dragoon Saga is on their list, along with another game we're going to talk about very soon. But sticking in 1998, Grim Fandango, I think I would love that game more if all of it was as good as Act 2. Because Act 2 puts you in this amazing noir city setting, where you're going.
Yeah, it's a Casablanca pastiche.
Yeah, where I mean Manny Calavera in the iconic white suit. Like, I think that it's such a cool noir Day of the Dead idea that sort of peaks a little too soon. Like I remember just being so excited to start Act 3 and then struggling to finish it when I was for the podcast in time. And speaking of the podcast, Grim Fandango, Parasite Eve, Suikoden 2, and Xenogears have all had Retro Encounter episodes. A lot of good contenders for future episodes here. I know Star Ocean 2 has been on our list for years, at least. And Dragon Quest Monsters, it's not exactly the Pokemon killer that maybe Enix wanted it to be, but that game is still kind of great, and it's a spin-off of Dragon Quest VI, which is wild to me, which I did not understand the first time I played that, because I played that game in the early 2000s before trying DQ6, and then playing DQ6 is like, oh no, this is the same Terry and Millie, isn't it? Or that was back when they couldn't decide if Millie's name was Millie, Muriel, or Milieu, which is a choice.
Milieu?
Yeah, some early translations of the
very literal.
Of the Super Nintendo version are a very, very literal Milieu. I don't know exactly what they were going for, but they've settled on Millie in remakes of Dragon Quest VI, which is fine by me.
Makes sense, yeah.
Can I ask you guys? I'm just curious. This was before I joined the site, because God knows I would have been on the panel if I was on staff at this time. Did you guys play the remaster of Grim Fandango or the original?
Remaster.
The remaster. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm just curious. What do you guys make of the improved controls, I guess you could say?
Not great.
Yeah.
They didn't
I
feel
played
great.
the original as well, though, and I remember them not being... They're probably better at the time because it was keyboard and mouse, so...
The tank controls, yeah.
Yeah, I played it on PS4, and there is an achievement, or I should say a trophy, for switching to tank controls in the first room of the game, and then playing through the whole game with tank controls on. And that was apparently something that the developers insisted on putting in.
Yeah. One thing I want to point out about 1998 before we move on is that 1998, when I was doing some reading around, is widely regarded as probably the best year for video games ever, just because of I think Tomb Raider and Spyro and a couple of other PlayStation 1 giants came out that year. Metal Gear Solid, I think, came out that year as well.
StarCraft came out in 1998.
It did, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So outside of its RPG oeuvre, it's also considered widely as a really damn fantastic year for games, and the fact that it's so, it's fourth with games like Suikoden, Xenogears, and then what we've got to come is crazy.
All agreed, but let's move on to what we have to come. Finishing in third place, we are only going a couple years ahead, and now we're reaching the games that were finished first and second on a lot of people's lists. Finishing third on our list of the top 10 best years for RPGs is 2000, and a couple of the great games in 2000, Baldur's Gate 2, Breath of Fire 4, Deus Ex, Diablo 2, Dragon Quest 7, Final Fantasy 9, Grandia 2, Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, Paper Mario, Persona 2 Eternal Punishment, Phantasy Star Online, Skies of Arcadia, Tales of Eternia, Vagrant Story. Wow. All right, this was my number one year, and because it is just full of games I really like and really love. I haven't played all of these. I've never played a Phantasy Star game before a few weeks ago when I started playing Phantasy Star 4 for this podcast, for a future episode of this podcast, but Skies of Arcadia in my top 10 JRPGs. Diablo 2 was one of my huge obsessions in high school. I went to high school in the early 2000s. A couple really good Retro Encounter games here, like Breath of Fire 4 and Final Fantasy 9. Final Fantasy 9 probably in my top 3 Final Fantasy games. But really, it's just all of these games I can either say are one of my favorites or hugely important to the genre. I haven't played Majora's Mask, and that's probably my biggest Zelda missing part of my resume.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I've played almost every game on this list. Maybe Dragon Quest 7 and Baldur's Gate 2, I think, are the only two I haven't. Oh, and Eternal Punishment. This is 2006 on crack for me. You've got my two favorite video games of all time, Skies of Arcadia and Final Fantasy 9, which is my top one Final Fantasy, and then you've got Deus Ex, which is extremely innovative for the time. Baldur's Gate 2 is quite possibly the best CRPG going.
Oh yeah,
Diablo 2 as well. Diablo 2 held that franchise. It wasn't even a franchise at that point. 12 years until Diablo 3 came along.
You say that. Diablo 2 had an official update from Blizzard via their patching system in 2013. What? They were updating that game for over a decade after it came out. You can still find people playing Diablo 2 on Battle.net today. And it was, I don't think I ever need to play Diablo 2 ever again, but it was so huge for me that I have a lot of memories associated with it in the early 2000s and through college in the later 2000s. Baldur's Gate 2 was probably the game that made BioWare. Like, that was the great D&D game for a long time. It's based on the Forgotten Realms story and setting of from Dungeons and Dragons. I think 3rd edition. D&D fans don't come after me. But all those other hugely influential games that Alana mentioned, I think Dragon Quest VII is a great Dragon Quest game. Paper Mario is maybe my favorite N64 game, full stop. I think that game's awesome.
It's not hard.
Yeah. Agreed, but let's not linger on that point a little too long. But Skies of Arcadia was it was the game that made me want a Dreamcast. When a friend offered to sell me his Dreamcast for $25, I thought to myself, he's also offering me his copy of Soul Calibur. That's pretty good. But now I can finally play Skies of Arcadia.
Yeah, but Soul Calibur's good too.
Soul Calibur's good too. Like I'm not saying Skies of Arcadia is the only reason is why I mentioned it. But I like playing Skies of Arcadia. I had to track down a copy on my own because he didn't have SOA, but I knew about the game by reputation. And playing that game in high school it was the only time I've ever owned a Sega system, unless the Genesis Mini counts. But like felt like me almost crossing enemy lines, like being a Sega kid when I was a Nintendo kid that switched to being a Sony kid in the 90s, and playing that for the first time and having it meet or exceed every expectation was so special to me, and replaying it on GameCube at university 4 or 5 years later, it's like this is the same game, and it's as good as I remember, with a few wrinkles, like a few bonuses here and there, and a few detractments here and there.
I love the idea that for some people, like, their high school rebellion is like smoking a cigarette behind the gym, but for Sollosi, it's playing a Sega game.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly when it happened. I was a senior in high school, so it was probably 2004. But Skies of Arcadia is very special to me. Tales of Eternia, one of the best Tales games. I think I worry that it's under the radar now because you can't. It's not really easy to obtain. There was a UK PSP version that I ended up playing because one of my Tales of Eternia discs died. But I worry that's under the radar now because because Tales of Symphonia was so huge to so many people, but I sort of preferred Eternia to Symphonia always.
Yeah, I do too.
And it was the first Tales game that felt like a fighting game with a really robust combo system.
It feels like it has the best balance of gameplay and story to that point. Like, Symphonia's is awkward 3D with some cool story moments, but Eternia's like pretty simple 90s 2000s story with a really cool 2D plane combat system. Like, they'd finally figured it out after 2 games. Like, it feels really great to play. Even now, I would say it's fast, it's really easy to pick up, but it's not, and it's got some challenge to it as well, which I think is great.
Yeah, Fantasia was sluggish, and then Destiny and the PS1 version of Fantasia were slightly more sluggish somehow, and Eternia was faster than both of those and had more freedom in spell customization and combos than the previous ones, and it has the greatest character in Tales history, Max, King of the One-Liners.
I love Max so much. Yeah!
He's the for people that haven't played Tales of Eternia, Max is the Little John of RPG characters. He has one word answers to everything, and is just so over the top and great. If we did a podcast on Tales of Eternia, I would spend a full 5 minutes on Max. I love that guy.
Yeah, me too.
I think 2000 is arguably the pinnacle of the 32/64-bit era. Like, it's the year where it reached its peak, because the following year after that, we moved into the next generation. It's kind of like the 1995 of the PlayStation and N64 era. Also, there's something that really gets me about this year. I think I said this earlier, and it's what I consider to be a perfect sequel is it's a game that builds off everything that the original has perfectly, to the point where you don't even need to play the original game anymore unless you're wanting to play for its story. And 2000 has 3 of those games on it for me. Diablo 3, Final
Diablo
Fantasy
2,
IX, and Majora's Mask.
I knew you were talking about Diablo 2 when you said that.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, after playing Diablo 2, you don't ever need to go back to Diablo 1 unless you want to cross it off a list. It's such a startling change.
Yeah, and I think it's the same thing with Final Fantasy IX and Majora's Mask. That's not saying that Final Fantasy 7 and 8 and Ocarina of Time aren't brilliant and well worth a play, but 9 and Majora's Mask does everything that the games before it did, but better. And for me, it's an incredible year. And I mean, providing we're ignoring the dragon in the corner, which is Dragon Quest VII.
Dragon Quest VII is good Dragon Quest, but it's also the most Dragon Quest. It's
also better than 3DS.
I could never get past the first Bloody Island. I just couldn't do it.
And well, going from the PS1 to the 3DS, you have a 110-hour game that turns into a 60-hour game, which is pretty good.
That's significant, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
They fix it.
Let's see. I'm trying to go back here. Can I get weird about voice actors for 1 minute?
Yeah.
The sort of 3 main characters of Grandia 2.
Not this again.
Yeah, the voice actors are Cam Clark, Jennifer Hale, and Jodie Benson, who are Leonardo from the Ninja Turtles, Fem Shep from Mass Effect, a little bit later than this, and literally the Little Mermaid. That's all. All right.
Every
throwing that out there.
Every time.
Whenever Jodie Benson appears in anything, which is like only 4 things, I have to bring it up.
I know, it's fine. Grandia 2's cool.
Grandia 2 is good. It's, I think it's my favorite Grandia. I think it is. Not a large list to draw from.
I was going to say, there's not much
really got 2
competition between 1 and 2, yeah.
I'm a little surprised if no one's
but I
mentioned Vagrant
haven't
Story.
put hard time into it. I was a little bit sad in Grandia 3 when Miranda left the party. That's why I stopped.
I'm a little surprised that we haven't talked about Vagrant Story anymore.
Right? Yeah, like, that's such a significant... Again, like Panzer Dragoon Saga before it feels like one of the most cinematic, really... it's probably got the best art design of that generation, I would say, out of any game ever. Like, those cutscenes are incredibly good.
The camera movement in cutscenes in Vagrant Story is so good. It makes me wish that the polygonal graphics were a little better, because it's like, these polygons are... good for 2000, but a little dated now. But if, like, because I played this game last year for the podcast, if we had this camera with slightly better textures on these characters, then it would be still breathtaking. But if anything, it highlighted the weird polygons in that game. The reason I didn't talk about Vagrant Story yet is because I'm still. It was a struggle going through that a year ago for the podcast. I procrastinated a little bit too much on it, but it's excellent. And now Joe definitely counts Vagrant Story among their favorites.
Of course, because it's Matsuno as well. It's just brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I definitely did not beat that game on my own at whatever age I played it. Like, it was definitely a joint effort between me and my brother and my mum. So, yeah, it's hard as hell.
All right. But now, speaking of things that are hard as hell, choosing between these last couple games on our list was definitely a struggle. This next one finished in everyone's top 5, and you will see why, because it is full of certifiable bangers. Also a Saga game, Jono.
Yeah,
and the one you
also a
reviewed as well.
certifiable banger.
So, finishing second in Retro Encounter's 10 best years for RPGs is 1995. And let's talk about some 1995 games that you might have heard of. Chrono Trigger, Dragon Quest VI, I'm not going to speak fast anymore, sorry. Front Mission, Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinistrals, Romancing Saga 3, Seiken Densetsu 3, Suikoden 1, Tactics Ogre Let Us Cling Together, Tales of Phantasia, Terranigma, and Secret of Evermore.
Damn.
I mean, for me, it finished second on my list because Chrono Trigger and Seiken Densetsu 3 and Tales of Phantasia are 3 of my all-time favorites. And then there's a couple other games on this list I really, really like Dragon Quest VI, Tactics Ogre, and Terranigma. And you know what? Secret of Evermore is all right.
Lufia 2.
It is.
Oh, Lufia 2.
Evermore doesn't deserve the
I
hate it gets.
too, man. I'm sorry. I've had an eye problem the past couple of days, but yeah, I'm tripping over my words. A bunch of Retro Encounter games on that list, including one we played earlier this year in Tactics Ogre. Hugely influential series starters like Tales of Phantasia. Oh man, like this list is mostly Super Nintendo, but it also might be the best year of Super Nintendo. Holy smoke!
Yeah, it's a lot like 2000 in the sense that it's the pinnacle of its generation.
Yeah, you've got PS1 as well, because Suikoden is really one of the first PS1 RPGs.
Another one of those transition years like 2000 or 2006. Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sort of ignoring the elephant, which is Chrono Trigger. I mean, Suikoden is... I know it doesn't get as much play as Suikoden 2, but it sets the baseline for that series so well, and has such great character work, and the combat is so quick, and it has things to improve upon. But it's a phenomenal
it's a hell of a
RPG.
starting point for that series. Like it's a pocket-sized, but also just really dense and really good.
Yep, and this has the greatest time travel game of all time this year in it.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, Tales of Fantasia. Whew.
I mean, Tales of Fantasia is a good one, actually. You say
It is.
that.
I'm not making fun of it, but yeah. It's Tales of Fantasia and Chrono Trigger are kind of like the year that Deep Impact and Armageddon came out at the same year.
Yeah. I mean, they play very differently as well. And actually, I didn't bring up Phantasy Star Online for being like the first console RPG, but a console MMO. But Tales of Fantasia is a really interesting piece of kit because it was it was the first Super Nintendo. The reason it didn't come over to the West is because they had to basically have a whole new cartridge for it to fit in sound chips and stuff to include voice acting in it. That was like the main reason it didn't make its way over here. So it's like a technical feat as well, on top of being a pretty solid RPG in its own right.
Very true. And it has one of the most infamous fan translations ever.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let's not say that line.
No, we're not going to say that line.
The DEJAP translation of Tales of Fantasia takes some liberties, but it was my first exposure to playing that game, and it really blew my mind. It was I played Tales of Fantasia in probably 01 or 02, and then after that I sought out Tales of Destiny and Tales of Eternia, one of which I liked much more than the other. But Tales of Fantasia has a sort of normal RPG story, but combining that, which is a pretty good story, I think, with a really interesting action combat system, the likes of which I had never played before, with, some of the more colorful character moments, it made me into a lifelong Tales fan. Like every single Tales game I've ever played, I'm trying to scratch that itch of how much I like Tales of Fantasia, and maybe only Abyss and Vesperia have really succeeded, but I don't know. And also, that's one of the first anime games I really played, because I played it before I tried Lunar 1 or 2, and it has a voiced J-pop opening song. And Kless is voiced by Trunks from Dragon Ball.
He is, yeah. It's great.
It's
so cool.
Oh, it's so good. And Dragon Quest VI, not my favorite Dragon Quest game, but a very, very good one. It was finally released in the West with its DS version over a decade later. Which is also a very good DS version.
This is the rarity where I think the OG one is actually slightly better, just because the graphics are very Chrono Trigger. I like the graphical presentation a lot.
Maybe, but does it have the party chat with a dragon that's in love with a human?
It does not have the party chat, but that is something. That's accurate. Yes.
That is something indeed. Yeah. What?
It's very cute. And Dragon Quest 6 is good.
It's great.
Not my favorite Dragon Quest, but I'm a big Dragon Quest fanboy, so I like almost all of them. And so, Jono, how much time do we have to talk about Romancing Saga 3?
I can't remember. I think it's one of my first random episodes I ever did, and I just take a hammer to it repeatedly. But here's the thing about Romancing Saga 3. I hate it, but at the same time, I look at it and I can appreciate what it is, because it is one of the best looking RPGs on the system. It has an astoundingly beautiful soundtrack. It's late Squaresoft SNES. It's hard to beat that in terms of its presentation. I don't like it, but I understand why people do. And that's the nicest thing I'm ever going to say about Romancing Saga 3 ever again.
Clip it, someone.
I see why people like it. Put that on the box. A much better game, though, I think, is Lufia 2.
Yeah, Lufia 2 is great. I was not on those podcasts, but it was not for lack of interest. I was just really busy. I forget. I think it was spring 2009, maybe February 2019.
It was March 2019.
March 2019. Okay,
it was
so
early 2019.
Yeah. I remember it was the springtime, but but I couldn't be on those episodes for reasons I don't remember. But that game is a little bit late era Super Nintendo, but it just does so many brilliant things with puzzles and dungeons that, and it has a monster recruiting system, and it feels so content rich for being a Super Nintendo game. Oh, it also has a roguelike-esque optional dungeon that you can play throughout the game. It's really, really excellent, and has a love story that literally brought tears to my eyes during the end credits.
Yeah. I thought you weren't going to talk about the ending, and I was like, "Well,
no, I won't do a spoiler." But like, it's the first time I played that game, not on the original SNES. I played it in, I think, the early 2000s, around the same time I played Tales of Fantasia. But the ending it's the first time I remember crying in a video game.
Yeah, it's a great game. I mean, I was on those episodes, and I love the way. And you didn't talk too much about combat, but the combat has just enough, along with everything else you talked about, which is also amazing. Just enough customization that makes it feel unique. It feels like simplistic turn-based combat, almost like made perfect.
Yeah, and there's character-based customization and equipment-based customization, and that monster recruiting system that I mentioned, where you get sort of a fifth party member is one of the monsters that you've met. It's a game that feels way ahead of its time for coming out in 1995, because it's like that equipment-based skill learning is a Final Fantasy IX thing in the year 2000. And the monster recruiting stuff is a little bit Dragon Quest V, but also like a little bit late SMT, late 90s Pokemon. It feels really ahead of its time, and it has a great story and characters. Lufia 2 is special.
Yeah, I think it's another one of those perfect sequels. I guess it's a prequel, technically. Mm-hmm. I just love I really, really like Lufia, but for me, the brilliance of Lufia's 2 is they just took the best part of Lufia 1 and just made it into a full-fledged game. The opening of Lufia 1 is
excised all the worst parts of Lufia 1.
I mean, for the 2000 entry, we were Jono, you mentioned about sequels that had you never feel like you had to play the previous game. That's what Lufia 2 is to me. I think it's the only good Lufia game, but it's but at least it's excellent.
You could play like the first hour of Lufia 1, and that would be like the best part of Lufia 1. Not coincidentally,
the first
hour of Lufia 1 is.
Yeah, you can play the first 15 minutes of Lufia 1. Although I have to giving Lufia 1 its due. That was a brilliant conceit, opening the game with the end of the other.
That's cool.
Yeah, but then you play, and
the twist in that game was awesome.
Yeah, so like you play as legendary heroes for the first hour of that game, and then it's 1 or 2 generations later you're playing sort of like dealing with the aftermath of what happened at the beginning. It's Lufia 1 is not terrible, but I don't think I would rather replay Lufia 2 than try to play that through to the end.
Any day.
That would be my advice.
Right. But before we move on to our overall winner, which listeners, maybe you've guessed it already, maybe you haven't. I want to shout out Terra Enigma a little bit. What a weird, cool game about rebuilding, reviving the world, rebuilding civilization, and then getting into some real weird kill god nonsense at the end. That game is not like anything else I've ever played. And it's in that what would you call it? The Heaven and Earth trilogy. It's
that games, yeah.
Yeah, the Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia / Illusion of Time, and then Terra Enigma. I think it is the most experimental out of a very experimental trio, and really, really holds up. I sort of think the early game dungeons are better than the late game dungeons, but it's like Chapter 2 is my favorite part of this 4-chapter game that gets real weird in chapters 3 and 4. But it's really excellent, and we did some episodes on it back in the 3 episodes per month game journal days of Retro Encounter. So go ahead and listen to those. I think. Oh man, I think like half of the guys on those podcasts are no longer with the site, but they were so long ago. But Terra Enigma is really cool. Secret of Evermore, you got a dog. It's a good dog.
Yeah, yep. I'm a little bit surprised that you haven't talked more about Seiken Densetsu 3, actually.
Oh, well, I've talked about Seiken Densetsu 3 over 3 episodes in 2020 and 2019.
Just download those.
And not coincidentally, I've played through Seiken Densetsu 3 3 times in 2019 and 3 times in 2020. I'm about Seiken Densetsu 3'd out. There were new game pluses in 2020, so it went way faster. But it's one of my all-time favorite Super Nintendo RPGs. The remake's great. Listen to those episodes. And I guess looking at the games on the 1995 list we haven't mentioned, we kind of glossed over one of the best RPGs of all time. right?
Front mission.
Whoops. Chrono Trigger's good, turns out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is what pushed it into my... It just got into my top 5. Without Chrono Trigger, I'm not even sure it'd have been on the list. I don't think, for me. Like, as much as I love...
Well, I agree,
I
actually.
love Seiken Densetsu 3. I'm sure everybody knows that, having listened to the podcast. I love Tales of Phantasia. I love Suikoden. I really like Terra Enigma. But Chrono Trigger, for me, is, like, pretty perfect. And, yeah, it's just a phenomenal video game. It's breezy, it's easy to play, it's accessible, it's really well written, the characters are all great, the skills, I don't really have anything bad to say about it, basically. So.
I agree. I mean, it's the best of Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest shoved into one game. I mean, that was the dream team, right?
It was the dream team.
Yep, the writer of Dragon Quest, the artist of Dragon Quest, and the creator of Final Fantasy, working with a Square team that was basically at the peak of their powers in 1995.
It's a brilliant game, and I mean, I think, again, it's... If no other RPGs got released that year, it was just Chrono Trigger, this year would probably still be appearing on this top 10 list just based on the strength of Chrono Trigger.
Probably.
It finished second overall.
Yeah, I mean, I voted it third, and without Chrono Trigger, it doesn't finish at all. So, yeah,
it finished second overall on my list, and it's because it's 3 games I adore, which include my favorite RPG of all time, and then another 4 or 5 that I really, really like. And that was enough for it to finish in my top 2.
Yeah, that's same for me. It's the reason why it got to top 1 for me. There's just so many games here that are my favorites and that are some of the best games ever created.
All right. Now, let's move on to our number 1 overall year. And we should say first that the second most recent year on our list is 2012, which finished 8th about over an hour ago in podcast years. And the number 1 overall finisher is the most recent year. Maybe recency bias takes effect a little bit here, but I think it's undeniable how good several of these games are. And it finished in the top 3 for all 4 of us. So we are mostly in agreement that this year is one of the all-time great years. What do you mean mostly in agreement? We are all in agreement that this is one of the best all-time years for RPGs. And it finished first place. The year is 2017. And again, it might be helpful to remind listeners, these are by Japanese release date. So some of the great games that came out in 2017. Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony. Dragon Quest XI Echoes of an Elusive Age. Doki Doki Literature Club. Final Fantasy XIV Stormblood. Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia. Horizon Zero Dawn. The Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel 3. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Nier Automata. Neo. And Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Now, I'll let someone else kick off most of the discussion, but for me, this was 3 games I love and a bunch of games I like, but those big 3 are Dragon Quest XI, Nier Automata, and Breath of the Wild. Holy crap. 3 of my probably 5 or 6 favorite games of the 2010s all were in the same year.
Yeah, and I realised I misspoke, actually, because I was saying, Undertale and Xenoblade 1 were, my 2 favourite games of the decade, and then I'm like, oh, Nier Automata, here we go. I think Nier Automata alone probably carries the year for me. There's a few other games, like Horizon Zero Dawn I'm not as hot on. Stormblood is probably the weakest 14 expansion from what I know. V3 is probably my least favourite Danganronpa game. Xenoblade 2 is probably my least favourite Xenoblade game. But those 3 games of Dragon Quest XI, Nier Automata, and Breath of the Wild, Dragon Quest XI is pure classic goodness. It's 3 acts of 100 hours that don't feel like 100 hours, that perfect classic turn-based RPG formulas. Breath of the Wild is controversial in some circles, but you can't deny that the art direction, the kind of music direction, and what it does with open spaces is pretty incredible, and it changes Zelda potentially for the better, maybe controversially. But Nier Automata is maybe one of the best written stories in an RPG I've played ever. It's ridiculous. It just hits me, knocks me on my feet every time I think about it. I reviewed it back when it came out, and I think I undersold it massively. It might be the game I undersold the most, and
you gave it a 92, didn't you?
I reread it, and I was like, 2017 me was an idiot.
Yeah. I mean, I also reviewed it, and I think gave it a 97, I think, maybe. So, I liked it a lot.
It's just so special, and I think it subverts so much in people still talk about it today. And like these 3 games are like 3 games that people still talk about today. And you know, Xenoblade 2, a lot of people also really love. Neo was quite a surprise to a lot of people, I think. And Fire Emblem Echoes felt like a good return to classic Fire Emblem, especially after Fates, you know, because Fates is a controversial.
Yeah, I've only played a little bit of Echoes, and as a longtime Fire Emblem fan, I got real mad about Fates. But Echoes is a good Fire Emblem game. Danganronpa V3 is, again, not my favorite either. That's Danganronpa 2, but it's a good Danganronpa game.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Yeah, with some endgame stuff that was a real mind blow.
Yeah.
Holy smoke. Listen to that spoiler cast which I think is on Random Encounter or not Retro Encounter, because, oh boy, that you have to go into spoilers to talk about why that game's great. But, Caitlin's furious at me for, not having played Trails of Cold Steel 3 or Horizon Zero Dawn, 2 of her favorite games of the past several years. But,
Cold Steel 3 is good, yeah.
But Alana hit the head on it. I think that the reason that I picked this year third and it ranks so highly for each of us is because those 3 are incredibly good. I think Nier Automata plays with some science fiction tropes that are not played out but are well explored, like the humanity of artificial intelligence and what makes us human versus what makes us a machine, and sort of like the hopelessness of war. There's a lot of ideas in place that are maybe familiar to readers of science fiction, but it does gameplay subversions of those science fiction ideas and gameplay subversions of what we expect out of RPGs that is truly incredible, that takes the game to unbelievable heights that I knew a little bit about it when I played it, because I played it for the first time earlier this year, but it's still completely floored me with some of the places it went. Nier Automata is one of the best games of the whole 2010s. I think when everyone was making their favorites of the 2010s lists, in say December 2019, I unfairly excluded Nier Automata, which would have finished in my top 3 probably if I were to remake such a list. Yeah. So I apologize to the Best of the Decade RPG fan feature for me maybe holding Automata back a little bit.
You should.
But
I made some mistakes too on that. Don't worry, I regret many things.
Mistakes were made.
One of them was not voting for Nier Automata.
Mistakes were made. But Nier Automata is unbelievable. Dragon Quest XI is making me waver in my long-held belief that Dragon Quest V is the best Dragon Quest game. I think it's my favorite or second favorite now, but it just hit every single note I wanted it to hit as a longtime Dragon Quest fan, and then just gave you so many brilliant traditional RPG elements and open world elements. It has the best crafting in a Dragon Quest game. It's the most beautiful looking Dragon Quest game. It references Dragon Quest III in a way that it feels like the perfect meeting of retro and modern of Dragon Quest. That when it came out, and also made me feel like a Zelda game sometimes, because there's a lot of riding on your horse in a big beautiful open field.
Yeah, it's like the year where there's something for everybody, really.
There is. And, Stormblood may be the weakest FF14 story, but I think it has some of the best FF14 encounters.
Right, it's got some really cool raids and dungeons in it, yeah.
The Four Lords trials and the Ivalice raids written by Matsuno are so good.
The Omega raid's great, too.
Yeah, Omega raid is very good. I think I like Ivalice and Four Lords better, but and it introduced us to some truly despicable FF14 villains that are whose effects are still being felt in the game in 2020. It's not my favorite bit of FF14, but it was very important to me on my FF14 journey. I'm not kidding. Like if I were to rank my favorite bits of FF14 content, Four Lords is top 5 and Ivalice might be top 1.
Jeez.
And yeah, apologies to Caitlin. I haven't played Zero Dawn or Cold Steel 3, and that's maybe why I put it third on my list and not first or second.
I mean, for me personally, this was the easiest vote. I put it number 1 without any hesitation. As soon as I looked at the list, I was like, oh, that's easy. Especially because Dragon Quest XI is on this list, which was not true if you're looking at North American release dates.
Correct, yep.
Obviously, Nier Automata is one of my top 2 games of all time. I mean, 3 of my top 4 games of the decade when we voted are on this list. But I'm going to call out Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which you guys haven't talked about yet. And I know that I think I'm alone and not alone, but I'm unique in that I prefer it to any of the Xenoblade games. It finished second on my best of the decade list.
Oh, interesting.
And I adore the game, and I think it's because I like the music better here, and the combat. For me, this has the best combat in any RPG ever made. It's just astoundingly amazing. And granted, I poured 300 hours into this game, so like I dove into the depths of the combat, and like in the first maybe 40, 50 hours of this game, the combat is obtuse and annoying, and even at the end it's still obtuse. But I just got addicted to it. I like the story a lot more than most people do. I like the variety of it, and if you include Torna as part of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, it's the best DLC ever released that I've played. And I messed around with both of the Witcher ones as well, in that it feels like Xenoblade Chronicles 2, but it also moves in a different direction, and it's important in that way because, like, I don't know, I played Remind, Kingdom Hearts 3's DLC, which is one of the biggest pieces of trash I've had to experience in some time. And I'm like comparing, like, it's the same price as Torna. I'm like, what? How is this possible? Right? Yeah. So anyway, like, and Breath of the Wild I don't even love, but like, it's such an important game, and Stormblood has great trials, and I'm going to stop talking now because Nier Automata is amazing.
I kind of do love Breath of the Wild. It's one of my favorite Zelda games. But it's I think it's the Zelda game that delivers the most on the promise of true nonlinearity since Zelda 1. Because in both Zelda 1 and Breath of the Wild, after some very brief setup, Breath of the Wild is a little bit more than it's dangerous to go alone, take this. But like they just sort of drop you into the middle of a field with some items and some direction, and then you go nuts for the rest of the game. And like being that kind of story while being this beautiful and giving players this much freedom, and like it's one of the best games ever for emergent stories. Like just the weird stuff that happens to you based on the combination of setting, items, and freedom and potential. Like it's like every moment in Breath of the Wild is a great Zelda game and also kind of a great, Far Cry game where you can accidentally set forests on fire and then get chased by tigers out of the area.
I would say that I love the Zelda series. I mean, some of my favorite games are Zelda games. What sets Breath of the Wild apart for me is Zelda games are fun, their experiences, their stories. Breath of the Wild is much more of an experience where it sets you into this world and lets you just do whatever the hell you want. You don't even have to go to the castle. You don't have to go to anything in order. It's just you're just living in this world, and that's unique.
If two excited Zelda fans were talking to each other about Breath of the Wild, about Zelda games, which we did for a whole month in April 2018, Retro Encounter Zelda month, go and check it out on RPGFan.com. But like if two Zelda fans are talking about any Zelda game besides Breath of the Wild, they would be like, "Oh, I loved this dungeon. Oh, I loved this item. Oh, I loved this story moment." But if they were having the same conversation about Breath of the Wild, it would be, "This crazy thing happened to me. This crazy thing happened to me." It's the potential for what can happen in Breath of the Wild while still having a good Zelda story is so wild, forgive me for using the same adjective a lot, is so impressive to me. I sort of would like Zelda to coexist in a world where they're still making handheld Zeldas and Breath of the Wild Zeldas and Zeldas that are sort of more tradition, go to these 10 dungeons and get these 10 items. Like, I sort of wish that Zelda continues to make all of those things, because there's different parts of the Zelda experience I value in different Zelda games. But Breath of the Wild is so good for what it accomplishes, and it's also just like, I mean, in no other game other than maybe Shadow of the Colossus do I just love standing in a quiet place and looking at the beautiful emptiness around me.
The sound does so much for that game. Like, sometimes when the music just stops, it's so good. And I think, like, I'm one of these people who really likes to be surprised, and like, I'm not a big Zelda fan at all. Like, I definitely prefer the 2D games, and even then there's only like 4 or 5 that I do really love. And even then, one of them is Minish Cap, which is apparently not that popular.
Minish Cap is awesome.
But Minish Cap is amazing.
Minish Cap is very, very good. It's not one of my favorites, but it's real good.
Yeah, and I don't really love open world games. Like, I'm not a big fan of things like Skyrim and things like that. And like, there's stupid things like, oh, it's raining and you can't climb up the cliff, and oh, your weapons break all the time and things like that. But it puts all of this together, and I still came out of having put like 100 hours into it and loved it. And like Nier does a similar thing, and like you said sci-fi, I don't like using sci-fi to describe Nier because I think it's so much more than that. But like there's a lot of things about Nier Automata that I was really worried about, and I just came away from it and was like, oh my god, it just all came together like so perfectly.
Here's something that might be, I mean, who knows, in a year from now or 2 years or 4 years from now, depending on when it comes out. I feel like Breath of the Wild 2, we might be looking at it as it has the potential to be one of those perfect sequels we were talking about. If they take Breath of the Wild and they expand on it and they give us everything we love about Breath of the Wild, but maybe even add a little bit of more traditional Zelda into it, I think that it might even eclipse Breath of the Wild. That's my hope, anyway.
I mean, I think Nintendo knows that they had an absolute like solid gold game with Breath of the Wild. So I'm just interested in what directions they take it by layering off of a foundation that's so strong. Yeah. I'm trying to think of how to go with this. Majora's Mask took its foundation and went a really weird direction. Instead of making another Ocarina of Time. If they do that for Breath of the Wild 2 or whatever subtitle the game gets, I will be so fascinated. Of course, people are excited for it because it's another big-budget Zelda game, but because of what Breath of the Wild was, and Nintendo knowing they could take a different direction with it, makes me really fascinated.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed.
And I mean, geez, we didn't talk about Doki Doki Literature Club. I mean, people...
That game scared me more than anything than when the dogs jumped out of the windows in Resident Evil.
I haven't played it.
Upsetting.
I haven't played it, but I listened to a podcast all about it, and every new plot point they went over, my jaw dropped another centimeter. The places that game goes sounds insane.
I have never noped out of a game as fast as the end of the first part of that game. I was playing it, and then something happens, and I was just like, nope, closing, goodbye, not playing for night now.
I think if we were to do an episode on Doki Doki Literature Club, and I'm not saying we will, I could just invite Marcos Gaspar on and just say, hey, this is Marcos Gaspar, what are your thoughts? And then I could just turn the mics off after 2 hours.
he would do that.
Mm-hmm. And I was doing some background Googling. There's at least one 2017 game that we neglected to mention. Jono, isn't Yakuza Kiwami 2 one of the better Yakuza games?
In my opinion, it's very good, yes. It's again it's a remake that don't bother playing Yakuza 2, just play Kiwami 2. It takes everything from the original and makes it better. It is missing a little bit of content from the original. It's missing an entire little area, but as I understand it, you don't really miss it. I love it. It's a great game. It uses the same engine as Yakuza 6 and Judgment, and supposedly Like a Dragon will use. It builds on a lot of plot points that were found in Yakuza 0, which we were talking about is just an astoundingly great game. Sollosi, I highly recommend you play it when you get yourself a little bit of time. I think you'd really like it. It's certainly more complex in terms of the story than Kiwami 1. Obviously, it's a sequel. But I love it. It's not. I would never classify Yakuza Kiwami as one of the best games of 2017, but I very much enjoy it.
Yeah, I was doing some not just for this, but throughout the whole podcast, I was going through each year to see if there was items that we missed, and I added a couple while we were recording, but that just happened with Yakuza Kiwami 2, and I figured, I should give Jono a shot to talk about one of the better Yakuza games before we close the book on 2017.
No, it makes me very happy. I wish I had a chance to talk about Yakuza 5, but that's okay.
That didn't come out in one of our years, I'm afraid.
No, it did not.
Is that the issue here?
No, it did not come out in one of our years, tragically.
Yeah, and there's people can justifiably get upset for us not including their favorite games or favorite years. 1996 was not one of our years, and that's when Super Mario RPG came out. And I'm sure that people are upset that one of the best Super Nintendo RPGs didn't get any mention. Persona 5 was 2016, even though it was 2017 in the West, so that's why that one slipped through the cracks. And Final Fantasy X was a 2001 game, and that which is again not on our list. So there are good RPGs that come out every single year, and it was a really difficult exercise to go through 33 lists of RPGs and pick 10 favorites out of those lists. And we mostly arrived to a consensus. There were 6 years that were on everyone's list, and between all four of us, we only brought up 15 years. But there's great RPGs every year, and I encourage you to check out the feature that is going to be published throughout October in multiple parts to just decide to see how both the fans and the staff voted on what our favorite RPGs year to year were. And we discussed, 14 years and probably 100 games in this podcast. So hopefully we covered enough ground to entertain you, listeners, and thank you for listening to us for so long. And also thank you to Zach, Jono, and Alana for joining me on this podcast exercise, which I was worried it would go a little long, but hopefully, hopefully you guys aren't suffering right now. And honestly, I could talk to the three of you about RPGs for far longer than 2 hours.
And hopefully we will on future podcasts.
Yes. Yeah, you're all are welcome among RPG fan staff to join Retro Encounter. You know where to find me. We can the subject can be literally anything. But for the next couple of weeks, we have picked literally a few things. For the next 2 weeks, we're doing episodes on wrong fantasy. Phantasy Star 4, The End of the Millennium, the one of the most beloved Genesis RPGs. I'm pretty early on, but hopefully I'll be ready enough to talk about it for next week and the following week. And Alana, pretty soon I will have beaten 2 Sega Genesis games. How crazy is that?
I'm so proud of you.
And the first one was Golden Axe on a sleepover, probably 25 years ago.
I'm still proud of you. Golden Axe is amazing.
Yeah, it's good. We even played the multiplayer in Golden Axe, which is considerably less amazing.
Good.
No, I'm sorry. The 1v1 multiplayer. We played some of that too.
Okay.
That's what I meant. I'm sorry. I was being a little vague. But anyway, Golden Axe, great. Phantasy Star 4, very good early on, but I still need to play it a little bit more.
Amazing.
Those episodes are filling out part of the rest of October, but also in October we're going to do an episode on Finding Paradise, that Ken Gao visual novel of sorts. That is his follow-up to A Bird Story, which is sort of an interquel, and To the Moon, which is an indie game that we talked about earlier in this episode. Ken Gao is one of those sort of, at the level of a Toby Fox, sort of like a platonic ideal of an indie developer who has something to say and tells it very uniquely and artfully in a way that is really breathtaking. I'm not saying Finding Paradise is Undertale or even To the Moon, but I'm really excited to play that, especially since we did an episode on Bird Story a couple years ago, and I thought that game was great.
You did one on To the Moon too, yeah.
Yeah, so playing Finding Paradise, which I haven't started yet, like based on the promise of A Bird Story and To the Moon, I'm really interested to check that out, and you can see that later this month. Also, we do have a game chosen for 2 episodes in November. That is going to be Final Fantasy X-2, a game that I tried playing like 15 years ago, thought it had pretty menus, and then forgot about it forever. But I'm going to make a full faith effort to play it next month, and you can hear about it on 2 episodes of Retro Encounter. Speaking of Retro Encounter, the podcast you're listening to right now, if you want to reach out to Retro Encounter, the best way to do so is email retro@rpgfan.com with any of your complaints or queries or comments. You can also visit rpgfan.com's main website, recently renovated for 2020. Comment on the message boards, visit the Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, Discord, Twitch. All of them are called either RPG Fan or RPG Fancom. There are so many ways to interact with us. Please do so however you choose, including 3 other podcasts: Random Encounter, which is about randomness and hosted every 2 weeks, in part by you, Jono.
Yes, come on by. We'd love to have you.
Also, Rhythm Encounter, hosted by Mike Salbato, also every 2 weeks, and I think featuring all 3 of us on various episodes. So if you want to hear the musical side of RPGs, we have a podcast all about it, which was active from 2014 to 2017, then took a long break, and then restarted less than 2 months ago, so please listen to Rhythm Encounter as well. Also, there is Phoenix Edge, which is hosted by Hat and mostly focused on current events, and is a weekly podcast that records, I believe, live every Monday or Tuesday, and then posts on YouTube and their own podcast feed, usually a day or 2 later. They do really great work. Listen to Phoenix Edge, Random Encounter, Rhythm Encounter, and Retro Encounter. But But before we sign off for good, let's tell the listeners how they can reach each of us individually, starting with you, Zach.
You can email me at zachw@rpgfan.com, or you can find me on Discord at zachw.
And Jono.
You can email me at jlogan@rpgfan.com or find me at JonoLogan on Twitter.
And Alana.
You can email me at alanah@rpgfan.com. I am Alana on the RPG Fan Discord server. My Twitter, which is probably the best place to find me, I am at Alana Hagues.
And listeners, if you want to reach out to me individually, the best way to do so is probably Twitter. I am at Evoker for Dogs, sometimes at The Real Monsoon most of the time. I am also Monsoon Mike on RPG Fans Discord, where I mostly get sports mad. This was a good one. It was such a weird exercise to go through RPGs by year or release period instead of game to game. But you know, I had a good time. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, it's me too.
Our pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Listeners, thank you. Good night and good luck.